I'm going into another ambush. It was a good unit, had trained and prepared well before coming into Sri Lanka in late 1988. It had well taped up drills. The unit and sub-unit commanders planned their operations as innovatively as circumstances permitted and took pains to avoid routine. So these guys were a little bit sharper. One of the biggest things you need to watch out for in a combat situation is routine and doing the same thing over and over again and giving a pattern of life that people can recognize and take advantage of. So these guys were trying to avoid that. Their one slip up was that they did not take enough pains to detect the setting in of routine and inclination to find comfort in slackness. So that means they did a good job when they were fresh, but once they started feeling tired, they would slip into routine and they'd slip into slackness.
Like complacency?
Complacency. As a newly inducted unit, the men were alert, up and about, and keen. And for a long time, nothing happened. And this is something that people try to express about combat, but combat is often a lot of waiting. And sometimes they picture this, sometimes they portray this well in the better movies about combat. They show, these long periods of waiting, and that can be what combat is. And what's happening here is this unit is there, and for a long time, nothing's happening. So when nothing happens, you start to get more and more complacent. In mid-May 1989, on a day when the road to Elephant Pass had to be opened by the unit, one of the posts en route detailed its platoon to ensure security of a stretch of road for a distance of about 2 kilometers. The platoon split into 4 parties of 6 to 7 men each and set out to search the road physically and secure an area astride to it, a distance of 300 to 500 meters within its given beat. Having cleared the roads, these parties established squads 300 to 400 meters away from the road, from where they could observe the road stretch and the area astride it. At varying intervals, one squad was to move out and relieve the next one, and so forth. The chain of relief would go, sometimes clockwise, sometimes anti-clockwise. This was to overcome boredom, avoid routine, and keep mobile at odd times, and thus dominate the stretch. So what they're doing is they've got their little squad set up, and then occasionally one squad would go move to another squad's position, and that squad would go to another squad's position. So they would just do that to keep moving, keep mobile, not get complacent. The road had been kept open for the whole day for up and down convoys. So they had to keep this road open because they were running convoys to another area. Adjacent to the road ran the railway line too, over which that day 2 trains were to run. It would be a long day, as all such road rail opening days were. So this is kind of a common mission for them, to secure these roads and these railroad tracks to get convoys through to bring logistical supplies to other parts of the military. The platoon secured the area and saw the convoy and the trains through by about 10:30. So 10:30 in the morning, they'd gone by. They would now have to wait for the returning convoy and trains in the afternoon. The sun was well up in the sky, and the men were being baked. Humidity added to the discomfort. It was time for the squads to get up and move out to relieve the next one. Number 1 and number 2 squads were north of the T-junction, about 400 to 500 meters away from it. Number 4 and 3 squads were opposite, 1 and 2 respectively, south of the road. Number 1 squad, however, over a period, had quietly decided to reduce this distance and establish itself next to the T-junction in a thick coconut grove, which had good shade. So there's that opportunity. Instead of baking out in the sun, we're just going to kind of get a little bit closer to the road, get a little bit closer to the T-junction. We're going to sit in some shade. The squad occupied the grove as it had been doing and relaxed against the trees. It was comprised of 6 men. They did not feel the necessity of posting sentries. No guards were out. The militants had noticed this routine. So this whole time they're being observed. And, that's something you've always got to expect. You've always got to expect that you're being watched. About 15 militants with weapons slowly drove a vehicle to the T-junction and went on, dropping a few members at 4 or 5 places across the branch road, opposite the unalert squad, barely 40 meters away. Then they occupied a few old trenches dug by the IPKF during the previous year. So here are these guys basically asleep and sitting in this coconut grove, and 40 meters away. I mean, you played football. 40, that's less than half a football field away. You've got the insurgents getting in position.
Is it indicating that they were doing that on purpose? Like that was their tactic to lull them to sleep a little bit? Or is it just kind of just
No.
the sheer complacency on their part?
I don't think they had a way to lure them to sleep.
Right.
I'm sure that they were watching this area. I'm sure that this was an area that they had done this mission before. And so they probably sat there and watched them do this 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 times in the past. And when these guys stayed alert, then they wouldn't attack them. And they just watched and waited. And finally one day they see them. It's a hot day. They go down and watch. They see them getting complacent. And they move into position.
Yeah, so it's not like they were waiting as a tactic, like let's not do anything and create this feeling of inactivity. So they go to sleep. It just they happen to get.
But I bet you they watched them over and over again, and every time that squad was alert, they just said, "Okay, we're not going to hit them."
Yeah,
we used to say that about when we were driving on my first deployment to Iraq, and we'd be driving around in our Humvees with no armor on them, slick Humvees. And we would say, look, our protection is that we're going to look alert. We're going to have our guns scanning. Everyone's going to have a gun pointed at a target somewhere, wherever you think would be a target, so that if an insurgent is going to attack us, they're going to look at us and say, you know what, let's wait till a little less aggressive convoy came through. Yeah. And it usually worked. I mean, we only got ambushed a few times, and so generally, I assume that worked well for us, considering how often ambushes were happening.
Yeah. Dang.
Around 1100 hours, all of them poured bullets into the resting squad. Not one remained alive. Not one could fire back. Thus, just then, the number 4 squad, which had upstuck from its location south of the main road and was going to number 1's location to relieve it, entered into the inferno. The opening volley of the militants who were watching caught and killed 4 of this party too, and wounded the other 2, just as they were entering the grove. Out of these 2, one succumbed soon, but the other, who survived, froze, took no further part, perhaps feigning death, and survived. Hearing this firing, the number 3 squad, which was about a kilometer away, rushed in very fast and was at the site in less than 10 minutes, even as the militants were still firing. The number 2 squad also reached the site a little north simultaneously to engage the retreating militants. This promptness was good, but what was not was that the 2 groups, having contacted and exchanged fire with the militants at the site, did not pursue the militants and allow them a clean break. And they allowed them a clean break. So these other 2 squads, when the firing started, they rushed in from 2 different directions and actually were in a good position to do some big damage to the militants. But they didn't. It is all the more regrettable because the 2 parties had contacted the militants from 2 directions and were thus in a position of considerable advantage. Instead, all of them converged on the site and started getting hold of the dead and wounded. So instead of attacking, they all just converged on the guys that were dead and wounded and started taking care of them. The losses amounted to 10 killed and 1 wounded. The militants suffered 1 dead. So, again, a horrible situation. The glaring example of crass complacency on the part of our brave soldiers, who neither firmly adhere to the spirit and content of basic tactical teaching, nor thinks it's necessary to use that little brain God has given. Our teaching and officering methods make sure that the soldier does not use his gray matter and develop guile. I'm going to read that part again.